Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 13 running back rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be talking about all things related to the running back position. But first, we'll talk about some waiver wire pickups that I did not include in yesterday's video. A couple players and a couple pieces of information that just came out yesterday. We'll talk about that and how it kind of integrates itself into this upcoming week's waiver wire, which of course is going to be running Wednesday night, Thursday morning, because again, the Tuesday game that was scheduled between the Baltimore Ravens and the Pittsburgh Steelers that was supposed to be played today has been moved to tomorrow. Hopefully, for those of you who have at least a couple of those players in your lineup, that game's going to go through and you'll get the points. You can potentially win this week. That's the hope. Now, outside of that, we'll go ahead and we'll talk about the running back matchups for this week, talking about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing running backs thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. I love how I perfectly say that every time. But let me tell you, there's so many outtakes for that. It's unbelievable. Anyway, outside of that, we'll go ahead and we'll talk about my top 36 running back rankings for a half PPR scoring format. Again, rankings are always subject to change. So for those of you who are looking to stay up to date on my rankings, you can either check out my Patreon, link down in the description, or you can go ahead and show up Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I can assure you guys, a lot of these rankings, a lot of you guys watch these, but Sunday mornings is where you can honestly find the most helpful information because everything will be up to date by then, and it'll probably put you on the right path for success. So make sure you take advantage of that. All right, let's get into it, shall we? I wanted to talk about a couple waiver wire pickups. So obviously the two pieces of information that came out of the Houston Texans yesterday that was pretty surprising was that Will Fuller has been popped for performance-enhancing drugs. He will be suspended for 6 games. He is out for the rest of the season. As well, another player on the defensive side of the ball, Bradley Roby, the cornerback, he will be out for the rest of the season with a performance-enhancing drug pop. The Houston Texans, that's 2 big losses for them on both sides of the ball. This specifically helps Michael Pittman Jr., in my opinion, for 2 out of the next 3 weeks as they play against the Houston Texans, a division rival. That's fantastic for him. As for who goes ahead and picks up the slack for Deshaun Watson and helps him in terms of fantasy going forward, of course, Deshaun Watson is a lesser quarterback because of this loss at the wide receiver position. But again, he's going to have to continue to play as he's played this season and try to step up his game and make the receivers around him better. But I think Kiki Cutie, of course, is got to be the number 1 guy there because Brandon Cooks, sure, is going to be the number 2 and he'll move into the number 1 slot. But Kiki Cutie has an incredible opportunity after a couple seasons of really being irrelevant in this offense to step up as a number 2 wide receiver in the slot position. As we know, they cut Kenny Stills a couple days ago, and Randall Cobb is on the injured reserve with a toe injury. So if, in fact, Kiki Cutie could step up in these upcoming weeks, I really do think that he could put together some great performances and be a decent wide receiver 3 or 4 on the fringe there going forward in a PPR format. So just kind of giving you guys some perspective. Outside of that, the Monday night game didn't really bring us much of a surprise anywhere. I mean, the Eagles don't like to run the ball. They're not great at passing the ball, but they continue to try to do that as much as possible. Russell Wilson is still on his skid. Chris Carson getting himself more acclimated in the offense, getting himself more usage. Great. DK Metcalf is an animal, dropped in touchdown. Unfortunate, but that is what it is. That is the price he has to pay at times for being such a damn beast. But either way, that's pretty much it for waiver wires. I wanted to go ahead and also talk about some running backs, shall we? Let's get into it. The anticipated running backs, and let's talk about some matchups as of right now. So we'll throw up a graphic on the screen. This is up to date, but obviously will not include the Baltimore Ravens or an updated perspective on the Pittsburgh Steelers because those teams have not played this week. So again, this is still up to date. The Detroit Lions are giving up the most points to opposing running backs thus far this season, 28.75 points per game on a half PPR scoring basis on average per week. So all in all, not really a surprise. These numbers are not going to change. The Green Bay Packers are still getting torched on the ground. David Montgomery had the best game of his season and maybe his whole career just this past week. 11 carries for over 100 yards. Looked fantastic. Got himself acclimated in the passing game. Perfect. The Houston Texans are still giving up the most points on the ground, or at least the most yards on the ground to opposing running backs. I mean, shouldn't be a surprise. They'll have to take on the Indianapolis Colts twice in the next 3 weeks. Hopefully, Jonathan Taylor will be healthy for that stretch, but we're going to have to just keep our eye on it. Otherwise, Nyheim Hines, Jordan Wilkins, these are the guys that are going to step up in his stead. The Las Vegas Raiders have definitely struggled against the run. Ito Smith and Brian Hill both took advantage of the matchup this weekend. They will have Frank Gore this upcoming week, and then the Indianapolis Colts following week. Again, these are running backs that could definitely play against this team and take advantage of it. Even though they don't give up as many yards on the ground, they are giving up a lot of touchdowns to running backs. The Carolina Panthers are on a bye week this week, so we will not take them into account, along with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So for those of you who are looking to potentially play Ronald Jones after a good week and or Mike Davis / Christian McCaffrey, they will be on a bye week. to return in the first week of the fantasy football playoffs. I really don't like having bye weeks this late in the season, but it is what it is as of right now. We move on. We see the Jacksonville Jaguars, of course, giving up a lot of points. The Tennessee Titans, the New York Giants, the New York Jets, the Los Angeles Chargers. These are teams that even last week were in identical positions because, of course, if you can't stop the run once, teams are going to continue to key in on that, and they're going to find the advantage there. And, every single week that has been the case, especially for teams like the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's really hard to stop the run. This upcoming week, they've got a pretty tough schedule. They got to take on Dalvin Cook. So, again, they just got beat up by Nick Chubb a little bit last week, and then now they got to take on Dalvin Cook. It's been really rough for that defensive front seven, but either way, these are matchups that we want to take advantage of. Just to kind of give you some more perspective as to some of the tougher matchups going into this upcoming week, of course, the New Orleans Saints will stop anybody in the running game. Of course, they had an advantage this last week because, again, there was no quarterback. They just stacked the box and they sent pressure at the Denver Broncos offense. But this upcoming week, the Atlanta Falcons, who played them just a couple weeks back with Todd Gurley, did not succeed in the running game, and they will not be able to do so once again this week. The Pittsburgh Steelers, even though they are one of the better run-stopping defenses in the National Football League, they still give up a fair share of rushing yards on the ground. I mean, we just saw James Robinson surpass 10 fantasy points against them a couple weeks back and put up 77 rushing yards and get a couple catches out of the backfield. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. We'll see how Antonio Gibson fares in the matchup. The Los Angeles Rams have been playing well. Tampa Bay, of course, on a bye week. The Indianapolis Colts, the Atlanta Falcons, San Francisco 49ers. Again, these are teams that are consistent in terms of stopping the run. The Cleveland Browns, even though they are at number 25, it is Derrick Henry season. So good luck to them this weekend either way. Let's go ahead and move on. Let's start talking about my top 36 running back rankings on the week. Like I just mentioned, it is Derrick Henry season, and therefore King Henry sits as the number one running back this week. He's coming off of a performance that was playoff Derrick Henry-esque. 27 rushing attempts for 178 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, all in the first half. Really just dominated. And the fact that he had himself 2 catches on 4 targets just continues to give him more baseline value, whether it's a half or a full PPR. The more touches he gets, the better. And the reason why I wanted to go ahead and highlight the amount of receptions he had is because last time he had a couple receptions, specifically against the Cleveland Browns. Let's not forget, week 1 of the 2019 season, he had himself a 75-yard screen pass to the house. In that game, he totaled 159 total yards and 2 touchdowns. So again, he's had himself some fairly good weeks against the Cleveland Browns in the past. I think he'll be able to impose as well. Again, he's coming off a 37.5 point fantasy point week in a half PPR scoring format. Talking about what the Cleveland Browns have given up on the ground as of late. Of course, James Robinson this past week, 128 yards and a touchdown. Josh Jacobs a couple weeks back, 128 yards without a touchdown. And then James Conner, 101 yards on the ground without a touchdown. But either way, I think, of course, this defense is still capable of giving up yards on the ground. And if Derrick Henry is going to come at them like he did last week, he's going to find a lot of success. He is my number one running back on the week without a doubt. We move on to our number 2. It is Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook had a little bit of a scare last week. I'm not too concerned about it. They were down 11 points. Okay, when you're down 11 points against the Carolina Panthers, you have to go ahead and pass the ball, and that's what they did. It did not give Dalvin Cook the opportunity to have to run the ball even more than he has earlier this season. He still gets his utilization in the passing game. 4 catches, 4 targets, 21 yards. Of course, we want to see more yardage out of that, especially for a guy like Dalvin Cook with breakout ability. But either way, I'm okay with the performance of getting 8 points, as long as he turns it around this week, because the Jacksonville Jaguars, like we mentioned before, they give up the 6th most points to opposing running backs just as of late. The Cleveland Browns went for 204 yards and a touchdown against them. Steelers 107-1. Duke Johnson 41-1. DeAndre Swift 116-2. Adrian Peterson went for 40-1 in the same game that DeAndre Swift went off. DJ as in David Johnson. I was going to say DJ Moore. David Johnson had the best game of his season in terms of rushing yards against them. And Joe Mixon had that 40-point bomb against them with, of course, the 151 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. So, again, great matchup. He's Dalvin Cook. As long as he's healthy and ready to go, I'm excited about it. We move on to our number 3. We have Nick Chubb, a guy that has had 5 consecutive games of 100-plus rushing yards. Again, in the full games that he's played this season, that doesn't count, of course, week 1 against the Baltimore Ravens. After that week 1 performance, this team has turned it around. They really looked themselves in the mirror and they decided we are going to impose our will on defenses and we are going to dominate on the ground. In the 5 consecutive games that he's played fully as of late, 100-plus yards every single time. This past weekend, 144 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 3 targets, 3 receptions, 32 receiving yards against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Has the privilege of taking on the Tennessee Titans defense that gives up the 7th most points to opposing running backs. Even with Kareem Hunt in the backfield, taking 10, 20 touches per game, it doesn't matter. Nick Chubb is delivering, and on the plays that he's able to at least break out for extra points, get himself opportunities in the passing game, It just seems like it's mutually exclusive from what Kareem Hunt does. Kareem Hunt will come in for an occasional goal line carry or a 4th and 1, plunge, or, will be used in the passing game. But I really don't think that they're cutting into each other's work as much as we may anticipate. Again, Kareem Hunt's coming off a game in which he averaged 6 yards per carry, but there is still one king in this backfield. It is Nick Chubb and will continue to be, and that is why he sits as our number 3. We move on to our number 4. We have James Robinson, another player that, again, he played against the Cleveland Browns. He had an insane game, 128 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 5 catches on 6 targets for 31 receiving yards, 24.4 points. This upcoming week takes on the Minnesota Vikings. Again, I think Minnesota's a pretty solid defense. In terms of stopping the pass, they're not great. In terms of stopping the run, they have been better than they were earlier this season. Of course, earlier this season, they gave up a fair share of points and were looking pretty questionable out there in terms of being able to stop the run under, of course, Zimmer's control. Mike Zimmer, a defensive-minded head coach, him not being able to stop the run seemed out of the ordinary. But the thing that I want to point out, of course, just recently, Zeke went for 103 yards on the ground and had a receiving touchdown against the Minnesota Vikings defense when, of course, the Dallas Cowboys ended up pulling an upset victory on them. But Robinson's a special player, and I just wanted to go ahead and point this out. In his last 5 games, in 4 of those contests, he has had over 99 rushing yards. Okay, the one contest against the Pittsburgh Steelers, he had 77 rushing yards. But also in those 5 contests, as his last 5 games, he's had 4 total touchdowns. So the fact that he's scoring touchdowns, getting almost 100 yards per game just on the ground, and then even against the Pittsburgh Steelers was able to produce, just leads me to believe that there really isn't anything you could put in front of James Robinson that's going to stop him. It doesn't matter who's playing quarterback. It doesn't matter what the matchup is. And the fact that he plays against Minnesota honestly doesn't bother me. It's a matter of just James Robinson versus the world. He's better than we could have ever imagined, and that's why he sits at 4. We have Austin Ekeler as my number 5. Listen, I'm not going to take any victory laps yet, okay? Because to be honest, I loved Austin Ekeler in the offseason. I knew what he was capable of, and the fact that he came in and had himself 16 targets, 11 receptions, and 85 receiving yards shouldn't be a surprise. It was a matter of time because the way that this offense is built and the amount of targets guys like Joshua Kelly, Tremaine Pope, Kallen Ballage, Justin Jackson were garnering, just continue to bleed in the idea that, man, this is a check down king. We have Justin Herbert that is just as good in the deep ball accuracy and feeding the ball to his proper receivers, whether it's Hunter Henry and Keenan Allen, as he is to dump it off and be able to give his running backs an opportunity. Austin Ekeler, though he didn't have the greatest game on the ground, 14 carries for 44 yards, 11 receptions and 85 receiving yards. My goodness, he is an animal. Plays against the New England Patriots this week. It's not the greatest matchup, but as of late, of course, Kenyan Drake, 78 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. Could have had a third one. Obviously got stopped on the 1-yard line. The Bills, a couple weeks prior, 167 yards on the ground with those 2 running backs combined and 2 rushing touchdowns. And then we had ourselves Jeff Wilson Jr. a couple weeks back, 112 on the ground, 3 rushing touchdowns. Phillip Lindsay went for 101 on the ground against them. So again, the New England Patriots have a sore spot in terms of the middle of their defense. If you run straight at them, it is going to be something of pretty of effective offense, in my opinion, if you go ahead and just run it down their throat. But Austin Ekeler's never been that running back. He'll still get utilization in the passing game, be able to take advantage of between the tackle plays, and in my opinion, be a top 5 back. We have ourselves Chris Carson as of right now as my number 6. Chris Carson, even though he didn't have the greatest game yesterday, it was, of course, just getting him back. You get him back in the lineup, of course he's going to make plays, because he's the best running back on that team, and it's not even close, and it was apparent yesterday. Just watching Carlos Hyde struggle when he's running the ball 10 times for 20 yards total, or, and the fact that Chris Carson on a single carry can go 20 yards, run over 3 guys, and drag 3 defenders into the end zone as he scores, that in itself is just next level play. I know the Philadelphia defense has been pretty stout this year. Of course, they've given up their fair share of touchdowns, including, Chris Carson last night, but on the ground, they've been pretty tough. So I think it was a good matchup to get him back. This upcoming week, they take on the New York Giants, 8th most points to opposing running backs. Beautiful. We'll take it. The other stat that I wanted to mention, the Seattle Seahawks, their starting running back every week thus far this season from weeks 1 through 12 has averaged 16 fantasy points per game in a half PPR scoring format. The starting running back of the team in all of those singular weeks, 16 fantasy points. So this includes, of course, Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde, DJ Dallas, Alex Collins. These guys that have been the starter of the team in a given week, we took all their totals, averaged it out. It's very valuable to have the number 1 running back of the Seattle Seahawks. Make sure you handcuff this guy regardless. I think going forward, Chris Carson's a stud, and especially this week. Miles Sanders is their number 7. Miles Sanders, fell out of the offense last week, or, yesterday in the Monday night game. I think it's just a matter of Doug Peterson. I think I don't want to call for his job just yet, because, again, they still could win the division if they turned it around. But the fact that Miles Sanders, who in my opinion, as of right now, is the most talented piece of that offense, is only touching the ball, 8 times, 9 times in a singular game, that is not enough. 6 carries for 15 yards is a joke. And with the talent that Miles Sanders has, and the fact that he's been averaging, nearly 5 yards per carry the entire season, it's unfortunate. This upcoming week, they have a really great opportunity to turn, this thing around. They've been losing a couple games in a row. They're not in the lead in their division, obviously, with, what are they, a 3-7-1 record. My goodness, they're not a good football team. But if they could take the ball out of Carson Wentz's hands, and they can run the ball consistently, and they can hit it up with play action, playing against the Green Bay Packers that have given up the second most points to opposing running backs, who gave up David Montgomery. Again, David Montgomery's not a great running back, but he had 103 rushing yards, 40 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown against them this past week. Anybody can succeed against the Green Bay Packers. I can assure you of that. I'm hoping, again, we'll see some opportunities for Miles Sanders in comparison to what we've seen in the past. Also, Green Bay's given up 114 total yards to Jonathan Taylor, 109 to James Robinson, and to Dalvin Cook a couple weeks back. We remember 163-3, in which he had that 45-game monster performance. So just give him opportunities. I know the Eagles are in the bottom 5 in rushing attempts and in the top 10 in passing attempts, but you got to be able to turn this thing around. There's something wrong with your organization. If you can't look in the mirror, Doug Peterson, to figure it out, then maybe I got to give you a call and figure this out. Either way, DeAndre Swift is my number 8 going into this upcoming week. So here's my thought process. DeAndre Swift has been out for 2 weeks with a concussion. Hopefully he'll be back this week, because, again, having DeAndre Swift out of your lineup is definitely going to hurt, because we know what he's capable of. He's finally just won the backfield. And when he's winning the backfield, he's getting himself receptions, a lot of rushing attempts, and he's a good enough talent out of Georgia to be a guy that obviously is going to be a top 12 back every single week. This week, he takes on the Chicago Bears. I'm not too worried about the matchup, to be honest, what I've seen as of late. Of course, this past Sunday night, the Green Bay Packers, those 2 running backs, Jamaal Williams, Aaron Jones, they combined for 163 and 1 on the ground. Dalvin Cook went for 96 on the ground against them. Alvin Kamara, as a total yardage, went for 163 against them. The Los Angeles Rams duo of Darrell Henderson and Malcolm Brown went for 121 against them. Rojo went for 106. So they give up yards on the ground. Touchdowns is going to be a tough thing to find, but DeAndre Swift is a running back that is definitely capable of getting yardage and getting receptions. He, earlier this year, week 1, had himself 3 receptions against this team, while Adrian Peterson was a starter and went for 114 yards against this defense. So, again, this defense, though they are one of the tougher ones, they are on a slide. They are in some trouble. And I think, of course, DeAndre Swift, if he's healthy, should be able to take advantage of it. We have Aaron Jones as our number 9. I find Aaron Jones in a spot in which, of course, he's playing well, 17 carries, 90 yards. That's great, but it's not enough. If they're going to blow out the Philadelphia Eagles, similar to the way that they blew out the Chicago Bears, which I 100% anticipate that being the way, then we're going to see a lot of Jamaal Williams in this game. And if that's the case, it's going to be a little bit like what Alvin Kamara is dealing with right now. He's getting kind of pulled in the third quarter, and you're not going to really see him in that second half, garnering points, getting himself red zone opportunities, and it'll be the backup. So as of right now, I still believe in Aaron Jones. I think he can easily have a 4-touchdown breakout game at any given moment, and that is why he's such a valuable prospect, especially against a matchup as the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't think it's past him. So as of right now, I have confidence, but again, he has been on this kind of road of where he's scoring almost 10 points here and there. He could score on anybody. It's just a matter of, are they going to give him the red zone opportunities going forward? I'm hoping that's the case. We move on to Josh Jacobs as our number 10. If Josh Jacobs is healthy, he's slotted in as my number 10. If he practices this week, there's no hiccups in his performance. He plays against the Jets. They give up the 9th most points. Of course, as of late, they haven't played the best of running backs, and their performances have not been great against them. Of course, Miami just this past week, DeAndre Washington, Matt Breida, these aren't the best running backs. They're not going to garner you a lot of points, especially considering Miami's running game hasn't been great all year. But this is what I'm hoping. It's either Josh Jacobs or it's Devontae Booker, and not both. Because if it's both, I think they're going to cut into each other's total opportunity. And if, in fact, they cut into each other's opportunity, it is going to be a problem. I'll go ahead and throw up Devontae Booker on the screen so we are aware. If Devontae Booker is active and ready to go, and by himself in this backfield, I still think that he is a potential top 18 running back. He doesn't sit at this number 10 spot. But again, if in fact it is Josh Jacobs, the lone back, and he has this backfield under command practicing this week, he's my number 10 back against the New York Jets. I think they'll have a nice revenge game this week. We move on to Alvin Kamara as our number 11. I mean, what can I say? Alvin Kamara, he's been a stud all year. But, without Drew Brees, it's not the same running back. And it's crazy to think that that's the possibility considering, Taysom Hill could easily just dump it off, but he's just not going to. He's not looking in his direction. There are multiple dropbacks just this past week in which I'm watching the game over again, and I'm looking, and he's not even, going through too many progressions. He's looking at 1-2 spots, dipping his head down, let's move. He's not looking for the check down. He's not looking in the direction of Alvin Kamara, and that hurts, pretty badly. Alvin Kamara had -2 receiving yards this last week. He doesn't put up those kind of numbers. That is not the Alvin Kamara we know. So until further notice, we're going to have to just wait and see what happens. Of course, it's hard for me to play a guy like Latavius Murray over Alvin Kamara because it goes against everything that I typically believe in. But because of the circumstance, it might be the case, and you might have to pull the trigger on that. But again, you'll have to make the decision on your own for now, as I leave Alvin Kamara as our number 11 this week, playing against Atlanta, which again, he should be able to at least put something up on the board against them. We have Antonio Gibson as our number 12. I do this as a common courtesy to Antonio Gibson. The fact that he won many of us weeks this past week with 115 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 5 catches for 21 yards, and 34.1 fantasy points, only behind Derrick Henry's monster game. This is a common courtesy. This is saying, hey, listen, you have been such a monster for us as of late. You've had 8 touchdowns in the last 5 games. I still think that, the Pittsburgh's run-stopping defense hasn't been the best since Devin Bush's injury that knocked him out for the season. And of course, they're getting better over time, but I still think there's a possibility that, the Washington football team could figure this out and maybe get, Antonio Gibson just as many receptions out of the backfield, get himself some work down in the, red zone. If in fact something is to happen, you get down there. Maybe there's a possibility that Antonio Gibson finds himself in the end zone, finds himself a 10-point play. But again, I still think, he's got so much talent, so much ability. It's going to be tough against Pittsburgh, and that is why instead of being like a number 4 or 5, he moves down to our 12th spot. We have Raheem Mostert as our number 13. Mostert, he came back and got the most of everything in that backfield. Unfortunately, Jeff Wilson, turned over the ball, and there was a little bit of a committee situation kind of going back and forth, but they're going to entirely give this backfield back to Raheem Mostert now that he's gotten a little bit of, comfort underneath his belt and at least has more reps underneath his belt. 18 total touches this past week. That is a great number. The fact that he plays against the Buffalo Bills, my goodness, I'm telling you guys, Buffalo cannot stop running backs. Austin Ekeler went for 129 total yards, of course, 11 receptions. Kenyan Drake went for 100 total rushing yards. DJ Dallas, 31 and 1. Damien Harris, 102 and a touchdown. The Jets, between P. Ryan and Frank Gore, combined for, I think it was 99 total yards from scrimmage on 20 carries, almost 5 yards per carry against them. And then they also had Joshua Kelly this past week with 7 carries for 35 yards and a touchdown, 5 yards per carry and a touchdown. They have had running backs torch them. Even CEH had the best game of his season this year, 161 rushing yards against that Buffalo defense. They cannot stop the run. I know AJ Klein was flying all over the field this past week, but a team like the 49ers who specialize in running it down your throat, they'll be able to get it done this week. Raheem Mostert's my number 13. We have Wayne Gallman, who, again, oh my God, Wayne Gallman, even though Wayne Gallman has been such a fantastic fantasy prospect in the last 5 weeks, and I cannot thank him enough for the amount of touchdowns he has scored us on a consistent weekly basis. It just gives me so much excitement for what Saquon Barkley is going to be capable of next year. It really does. That is all Wayne Gallman does. It just increases the value of what Saquon will be capable of in this offense when they improve and he's healthy and ready to go. He's got a long road coming back from that ACL injury, but Wayne Gallman, with his performances, have given me hope. 94 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 3 catches on 5 targets, has himself Seattle this upcoming week, giving up the 11th most points to running backs. Again, Wayne Gallman with 24 rushing attempts. The numbers have just gone up every single week. What was 10, 14, 16, 18, 24. The snap percentage going up from the 50s to the mid-50s all the way up to 65-ish%. My goodness, everything is going in his direction. The Seattle Seahawks, the only problem that I have with the matchup, obviously if you fall in the end zone, that's great. Wayne Gallman's a specialist of doing so. But as of late, in the last 5 games, they have not given up a single running back performance of over 40 rushing yards. That is my only fear. And of course, that is something that we're going to keep our eye on. They have a couple injuries. I think Carlos Dunlap's having an MRI on his foot. So maybe if he's out, it gives Wayne Gallman a little bit more, stability in terms of his rushing ability. But either way, I think the Giants offensive line, they're a better run blocking team than they are pass blocking regardless. David Montgomery fits in as our number 15. So David Montgomery had a fantastic performance. 103 rushing yards and 11 rushing attempts, 6 targets, 5 receptions, 40 receiving yards, and a touchdown. I mean, he is pretty much, that's what we expect from David Montgomery. Not every week, of course, not every week. I mean, you played against the Green Bay Packers, but we talked about this a couple weeks back. The easiest strength of schedule for the running back position is David Montgomery rest of the season. He plays against the Detroit Lions this week. They give up the most points to opposing running backs. Just talking about as of late, Duke Johnson went for 80 total yards and a touchdown. Antonio Gibson, 65 on the ground and 2 touchdowns. Dalvin Cook, 252 and 2 on the ground. Jordan Wilkins, 103 and 1. The Detroit Lions, they give up points. If David Montgomery in this offense is continuing to run the ball and Matt Nagy continues to give him opportunity, my goodness, will they be in a pretty good spot in a matchup. Of course, should be a closer scoring one. Then, of course, Green Bay stacked on their skulls. We have, of course, Kenyan Drake as our number 16. So here's my issue. Kenyan Drake has been great as of late. In the last 6 games, he's averaging 15.3 fantasy points per game. But he is getting a little bit too dependent on touchdowns. Earlier this season, all the touchdowns in which we were thinking Kenyan Drake would have would be a pull from Kyler Murray, and Kyler Murray dazzling his way into the end zone and dancing, and us being really upset about Kenyan Drake. But as of late, it's really been the Kenyan Drake show in terms of running the ball. And as long as they continue to at least give us more and more opportunity there, I'm perfectly fine with it. If Kyler Murray's going to stop running the ball because of the shoulder injury and he doesn't want to get hit there, then it's going to be a Kenyan Drake show because, of course, Chase Edmonds is not getting as many touches. And it just seems to me like playing against the Rams, not the toughest matchup. Last season, week 17, they played against the Rams. Kenyan Drake averaged, 12 carries for 60 yards, 5 yards per carry, had a rushing touchdown. In the last 2 weeks, he's had 7 receptions, which is the most he's had all season long because he wasn't a guy involved in the passing game. Getting him more utilization there, getting more work out of him, just seems to me the way to go for Kenyan Drake and why I put him at 16. 17 is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Clyde Edwards, the last time he played against the Denver Broncos, had himself a pretty good game. I think, of course, 46 yards and a touchdown isn't something to go home about and, pump your fist. But for Clyde Edwards as of right now and where he is as a, running back and the capacity in which they use him, I'll take 10 fantasy points any given week. As of right now, I think he still is an RB2 with the upside of getting more touches. This past week had 11 rushing attempts for 37 yards against the Tampa Bay defense. We weren't expecting much. We didn't get much out of him. It's not a surprise. But again, he plays against the Denver Broncos. Latavius Murray went for 124 and 2 rushing touchdowns against them. Josh Jacobs, 112 and 2. In the same game, Devontae Booker, 81 and 2 against them. They have had 6 rushing touchdowns dropped on their heads in the not even counting Taysom Hill. If you want to count Taysom Hill, 8 rushing touchdowns against them in the last 2 weeks. Clyde Edwards, let's hope they hand you the ball because you should be in line for some pretty good points this week. We have Kareem Hunt as our number 18. Many of you may have been wondering, where's Kareem Hunt and when is he going to be spoken about? My only concern with Kareem Hunt is he's not getting as many touches. Sure, he averaged 6.2 yards per carry this last week, but didn't get any work in the passing game, didn't get any work in the red zone in terms of at least succeeding on it. Of course, you'll get some touches here and there in the red zone, but nothing that we can go home about and say, you know what, that was a great performance, got over double-digit points, because this is back-to-back weeks in which he's produced less than double-digit points, 8.2 if I'm not mistaken, and then now 6.2, I think it was 8.4, and then 6.2 this past week against Jacksonville. Plays against Tennessee. It's a favorable matchup. They give up the 7th most points, but am I 100% on board to start him as a upper tier back? No. I think he's in the middle of the pack as of right now because of his total touches and because, again, he is becoming touchdown dependent in a backfield in which if he doesn't have a breakout run and has the opportunity to score on said drive, it's going to be tough for him to get more utilization. We have Nyheim Hines as our 19. Again, Nyheim Hines is a track athlete. You could put him anywhere on the field and he's going to succeed, but when you put him in the backfield, he is still going to be an animal because of what Phillip Rivers at least gives him in terms of value. 10 targets, 8 receptions, 66 yards, 13.5 fantasy points, plays against the Houston Texans. They give up the 3rd most points to opposing running backs in a half PPR, but they give up the most rushing yards to opposing running backs this season, coming off of a game in which, of course, Nyheim Hines was only averaging 2.9 yards per carry against the Tennessee Titans. It's interesting that the Tennessee Titans, as soon as they put Jadeveon Clowney on the injured reserve, they somehow got better as a defense. Pretty interesting, but is it really? I don't know. Anyway, the only reason I wanted to point that out is because, again, they play against Houston. Just as of the last couple of weeks, AP went for 55 and 2 on the ground. Damien Harris, 43 and 1. The Browns, running back combos, 230 and 1. James Robinson, 99 and 1. Derrick Henry earlier this year, 212 and 2. There are a lot of yards to be had here. And I think, of course, Houston's in trouble because this is a run-first team. If Jonathan Taylor's out, Nyheim Hines continues to stay in that spot. Melvin Gordon. Again, Melvin Gordon's not a bad running back. I think Phillip Lindsay going down really does give him a lot of value. Royce Freeman came in as a little bit of a spark in the running game, but I don't think that is going to be something that can be sustainable as of right now. Melvin Gordon's coming off a game in which, of course, nobody succeeded in that offense. So I'm not really putting that against him. But he plays against Kansas City. Earlier this year, he had himself 68 rushing yards and a touchdown against Kansas City. We've seen as of the last couple weeks, Josh Jacobs 55-1. Christian McCaffrey went for, I think, 69-1 against them. And there was one other running back that had 82 yards and a touchdown. Trying to remember who the heck it was. I'm drawing a blank. Doesn't really happen often. But either way, Melvin Gordon has a favorable matchup. The quarterbacks should be cleared this week. They're going to run the ball as consistently as they do. Try to keep the ball away from Patrick Mahomes and try to be able to just impose their will on the ground. Melvin Gordon's looked like a better running back as of late, especially with that performance he had against the Miami Dolphins. Hopefully, he'll continue to build upon that. We move on to our number 21. We have ourselves Damien Harris. Again, Damien Harris is in one of the more favorable matchups, but it's a matter of touchdowns. The Los Angeles Chargers give up the 10th most points to running backs, and even though Damien Harris is the lead back and Sony Michel's not taking work, if James White is taking work, if Cam Newton is stealing red zone touchdowns, it is going to be a problem. But that being said, I think the yardage in itself is going to give him enough value to be sustainable as a 10-point play, maybe more with the upside. The Bills, as a combination of Devin Singletary and, of course, Zach Moss, went for 141 rushing yards against them. The Jets, the week prior, 94 and 1 rushing touchdown between their two running backs. Salvin Ahmed, 85 and a touchdown. The Raiders duo, 123 and 2. Phillip Lindsay, 83 and 1. This defense cannot stop the run. I would fire up any running back I have against the Los Angeles Chargers, and that is Damien Harris. We have J.K. Dobbins as our number 22. He hasn't played this week yet, but again, this is being recorded on Tuesday morning. So if in fact Wednesday he plays and he's great, that's fantastic. But I think the Dallas matchup is what I'm keying in on. I don't really care how he plays against Pittsburgh. I don't even care if he plays against Pittsburgh. I want to see him play against Dallas. The Dallas Cowboys have given up so many points to running backs just as of late. Dalvin Cook, 160-1. Antonio Gibson, 136-3. And in the other performance a couple weeks earlier, Gibson went for 128-1. Kenyan Drake, 164-2. The Cowboys cannot stop the run against good offenses. J.K. Dobbins is in a good offense in terms of running the ball. He should be the starting back going forward. He earned that the last time we saw him play. I think they're going to continue to key in on that. J.K. Dobbins, just a fantastic play. Hopefully, he'll end up like DeAndre Swift and be given the job and finally named the starter. Myles Gaskin is number 23. I don't know if he's going to be taken off the injured reserve. Of course, he's been designated to return. That leaves a 21-day window. Of course, I think they've already gotten to about 10 days in that process. I think they'll activate him this week. Of course, they need a running back. With Salvin Ahmed going down last week, who do they have? DeAndre Washington? That is not someone that you want to send out every time. With Ryan Fitzpatrick, the ability to have Myles Gaskin back in the backfield is such an incredible advantage. Just thinking about what Myles Gaskin was capable of producing prior to when he left from with the injury, of course, the MCL injury to his knee. He had 22 touches in one game and 24 touches in the following game. Those were the last two games that he played. He was getting a boatload of touches. He had 2 touchdowns in the last 3 games that he played. He was an incredible fantasy prospect, especially considering he's averaged at least about 4 receptions per game in a half, full PPR scoring format. That's fantastic. Playing against Cincinnati, Gallman 94-1, Gibson 94-1, Henry 112-1. Cincinnati's matchup, beautiful against. So we move on to Giovani Bernard. Speaking of the Cincinnati Bengals, I think the matchup against the Miami Dolphins is an advantageous one. And even though Giovani Bernard, without Joe Burrow in the lineup, could be a little bit of a liability of a play, he wasn't really given that many opportunities to run the ball this past week. 8 rushing attempts for 32 yards. It's a 4-point all yard per carry average. Had himself 2 catches for 17 yards. The Miami Dolphins, they give up the 12th most points to running backs as of late. Frank Gore went for 86 total yards against that defense. That is not, I think Giovani Bernard should be able to do something like that as well. The Broncos backfield a couple weeks back, 164-2. So either way, I still think that the Miami Dolphins, though they are a tougher defense, in terms of running the ball on them, it should be the easiest thing that you could possibly do against them on a weekly basis. We have James Conner as our number 25. I don't know if it's going to be Benny Snell the week following. I know there's some complications, positive tests. As of right now, I believe in James Conner. I just don't know if they're going to be splitting his carries going forward. I don't know if he's going to be healthy. This is a matter of rankings are subject to change. That's really what it is. So Sunday morning, we'll have a better idea. But as of right now, I'm at the point where I'm thinking, okay, Washington's got a pretty good run-stopping defense. This team wants to pass the ball. And when, in fact, they end up playing against the Washington football team, whether it is the following Monday or Tuesday, we're just going to have to wait and see if James Conner is even available. If Benny Snell's there, we throw him in, we're good to go. But again, this is a team that has kind of been shying away from the run as of late. Maybe they'll continue to do that, and that's what I'm kind of anticipating. We have, Ezekiel Elliott as our number 26. I'm sorry. I mean, I have to put him here. He's just not, he's a liability at points, right? 10 total rushing attempts, 32 yards, 1 catch for 7 yards, fumbled. Plays against the Baltimore Ravens. They will have probably Brandon Williams back, which is their interior defense lineman, one of the better one shades and nose techs in the National Football League. Probably will get, I don't know if Calais Campbell will be available by then. Maybe Matthew Judon will also be. The run-stopping defense of Baltimore will probably be at a full capacity. Does that mean I want to avoid Zeke? Maybe. But we're just going to have to wait and see what they're going to be looking at. I know there's a lot of positive tests on that defense. So if, in fact, they are missing a lot of talent, then, of course, we're going to play Zeke and we're going to try to take advantage of it. But if, in fact, they are back to full form, be careful with Zeke. That's all I got to say. We move on to Jordan Wilkins, our 27. This is a player that we maybe should have mentioned yesterday in terms of a waiver wire picked up. I did talk about it on the Fantasy Pros football podcast. For those of you who haven't checked that out, go check out their YouTube channel and their podcast. I think you can find it anywhere. iTunes, Spotify, all that kind of jazz probably. Had a great time on there. Those guys were awesome. We talked about Jordan Wilkins as a potential opportunity to be the number 2 back in this offense. If, in fact, Jonathan Taylor misses again, I'm not opposed to going ahead and firing him up against the Houston Texans. Again, they give up the most yards to opposing running backs this season on the ground. So as of right now, if Jordan Wilkins, is going to touch the ball 7 times, on the ground, maybe a couple catches here and there, I think that'll increase if you're playing against Houston. If you mount an early lead, if Deshaun Watson without Will Fuller cannot throw the ball, it ends up being a running game in which you're running from ahead and you're going to put in a guy like Jordan Wilkins to kill the clock. I think he could be of service this upcoming week. We move on to Latavius Murray, another running back that if you're up early and you want to kill clock and save your starting running back for the playoffs, you go ahead and you use Latavius Murray instead of Alvin Kamara. He's coming off of a week of 19 total rushing attempts, 124 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. I mean, he did this last year. There were performances in which Alvin Kamara was out against the Chicago Bears because of the injury, and he was out against the Arizona Cardinals, and he just torched them. He absolutely just murked their defenses. He did that against the Denver Broncos this last week. Against Atlanta, they're tough. I mean, Grady Jarrett really is a havoc. I mean, he just causes havoc. He is a disruptive defensive tackle / 3-shade like no other. I mean, really, he is an Aaron Donald for that team. Even though he is not at the level of an Aaron Donald, he really is disruptive for that defensive line in Atlanta. And it's hard to run the ball against them. They are really getting better. They proved that they could take on one of the better running teams and they stuffed them the whole game. So either way, I still think that Latavius Murray, if you are bold enough to make the play and put him over Kamara, you could definitely go for it. But maybe as a flex option this week, not a bad play. We have Frank Gore as our number 29. As of right now, Frank Gore is a 10-point guy. He's had a touchdown 2 weeks back. This past week came up with a total of 86 yards, 3 catches. Plays against Las Vegas, giving up the 4th most points to opposing running backs. I think the Raiders have something to prove to themselves. I think they'll definitely be able to, get after his offense, specifically against Sam Darnold, send pressure at him, make him maybe have to beat them with his arm. Either way, I still think that Frank Gore has a lot of value in the sense that if you need a flex play, if you need someone to come in and at least give you 8 to 10 points, that's where you're going to find value, especially in a half PPR. Full PPR, maybe he's a little bit less valued considering the touches in the passing game. Yes, they have been there, but they may be able to fade away if, in fact, it just doesn't go in his direction. But as of right now, pretty confident with Frank Gore at 29. Moving on to our number 30, we have ourselves James White. So James White, as of right now, number 30, should be a comfortable play. I think, of course, we're going to need to see him get more work in the passing game. Only 1 target, 1 reception is not the best thing. Relying on touchdowns is not a great thing, but he plays against the Chargers. I'm telling you, the Chargers, they give up a fair share of receptions to opposing running backs. If, in fact, we're going to see these guys take advantage of it. Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, I think they combined for 5 catches for 40 yards or something like that. So again, there could be a good chance that James White, a couple receptions here and there in a matchup in which they're going to have to keep up with that offense on the opposing side. Should be an exciting one for James White. Hopefully, he'll continue to be the RB2 and have some extra work in the red zone going forward. We have ourselves number 31, Jamaal Williams. I think, of course, the Green Bay Packers are going to beat down the Philadelphia Eagles. Like I mentioned earlier, it is going to force Jamaal Williams to get more touches. He's coming off of a game of 17 rushing attempts, 73 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. If I showed you the stat line, you'd think he was a starting running back of this team and Aaron Jones was out. Just not the case. It's just a fact of the matter that, they're going to kill clock in the second half. Jamaal Williams going to do so. We have Kallen Ballage as our 32. With Austin Ekeler as a starting back, Joshua Kelly was subjected to the number 2 work. I think Kallen Ballage, when he comes back and healthy, he has earned himself the job of being the number 2 running back. In this specific scenario against the New England Patriots, like I mentioned before, they are not one of the better run-stopping defenses, even though they do give up a limited amount of yards here and there based on matchup. But I think the Chargers will be able to take advantage of it and run the ball on them pretty successfully. Cam Akers is our number 33. Again, this is a toss-up. This is just running the hot hand, and hopefully, hopefully, Sean McVay wants to go ahead and give him the ball. If he does consistently give him the ball, I think this upcoming week's matchup against Arizona, though it is not one of the better ones, I mean, you never know. He maybe breaks out a run here and there. He has himself an opportunity to play in the passing game or on the goal line, and he scores. It's just about getting and building momentum with a rookie running back like this. I'm hoping that he'll continue to build on it. Duke Johnson at 34, assuming that David Johnson's not back from the injured reserve. Of course, he's going to be designated to return this week, as it is his 3-week process of the injured reserve. He could end up out for the rest of the season. They might cut him in the offseason. We never know. But as of right now, if Duke Johnson's the only guy there, I'll go ahead and play him at 34 against a tough matchup against Indianapolis. We'll have Ito Smith as our number 35. Again, when you play against New Orleans, they're the best run-stopping defenses. The only running back out of Brian Hill and Ito Smith I want to play is the guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield. And as of right now, it seems to be Ito Smith as that spot. And we move on to our last running back, Zach Moss. He played 60% of the snaps, even though Devin Singletary played 40. He was out-touched by Devin Singletary, but I'm not too worried about that specific scenario. I still think that Zach Moss is currently the goal line back. If they get down there and Josh Allen's not the one running for the pylon, it will be Zach Moss, and that is why he has the upside value and finishes off my top 36 list. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I appreciate you guys, coming through, checking out the channel, subscribing, liking. Cannot thank you guys enough. It's been absolutely fantastic, the support that you guys have sent in my direction this season. Hopefully, you guys will continue to stick with me as I try to help you guys win some 2020 fantasy football championships. Until tomorrow, we'll be talking about some wide receivers and potentially some tight ends. Thank you, everybody. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.